Hello, my name is Tammy Rose, and welcome to Transcendental Concord and Concord Days, the show that we have as part of our whole brand. And I'm very happy to introduce my friend, Joe Medeiros, who is going to speak ancient Greek to us from the Odyssey.
Edukeinu gessigganos kai Penelopeies, ussegepeita eolpa teleutesen hapmenoinais, paurregardoi paides hamoioi patri pelontai, hoi pleones kakius pauroi dette patros areius. How's that?
That's beautiful. What does it mean?
It says, or it means, but if you are not the child of that man, meaning Odysseus, and Penelope, there is no hope for you to finish what you like desire or like want. I don't know. There's a word there that's hard to translate. For few children are the same as their father. The majority are worse, and few are better than their father.
Wow. And so wait, you're doing like the Telemachus section?
Yeah. So
Currently?
So this is from book 2. Athena is appearing to Telemachus as mentor, and she has these words to say to him. She's already appeared to him in book 1, and she's like, you got to do all this stuff, you got to kill those people. And then in book 2, she's like, okay, you got to like go on this trip and go see Nestor and Menelaus and ask them about your dad.
Cool. So wait, so let me back up and sort of say the whole reason that we're doing this episode today is because the Transcendentalists, especially Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Margaret Fuller, like all of them who were, even Jones Very, like the obscure ones, who had a traditional education, Thoreau and Emerson, and like Margaret Fuller was educated at home by her father because her father was like, you need to have the same kind of education that boys do. And he started her from a very young age. But it was very traditional for kids, back in the 1800s to be looking to Europe and especially to all of these classical works. So children would be taught ancient Greek and Latin in school. And so I'm very excited to bring Joe on. Joe, I'm so glad to have you here because you're one of the few people that I know. And so frankly, like I studied Latin. I studied Latin in high school because I knew that Thoreau was into it. And then I went on to do ancient Greek in college. But just because, and I took 4 years in Latin and like 2 years of ancient Greek, and I do not speak it. It's still really hard for me to read it, and let alone like get to the level of elegant translation. And Joe, I feel like you're one of the few people I know among like all of my, classical language nerd friends, who actually speaks it, and you're actually outperforming it in New York City, in Central Park, and like on the Lower East Side. Can you talk about that production and sort of like why you're doing it? Why are you bringing ancient Greek to the masses?
No, that's a good question. I'm not sure I always know what the answer is. I will say one thing though, I can't speak it as like a conversational
Right.
language. I don't do that. I'm definitely memorizing, I know what I'm saying, but I'm memorizing, reciting Homer.
Right. And ancient Greek is very distinctive from modern Greek as well,
it
right?
is, it is. Well, structurally they're different. The pronunciation is different. There's a lot of, well, we'll get this out of the way. There's
Okay.
a lot of argument about how it was pronounced, and there are these reconstructed pronunciations, and there are people who say that ancient Greek would have been pronounced the same way that modern Greek is. So there are lots of different
Schools of
ideas.
thought.
Yeah,
Yeah.
schools of thought and ideas about it. So I want to like make sure that gets put out there. What I'm doing is taking, uh, you know, scholarly ideas. So it's definitely from an academic point of view about the sounds, particularly the vowels and consonants. And I'm taking those and approximating them as well as I can, or what fits with me. And then there's also like a pitch accent, which nobody really knows how that was pronounced or what it would have sounded like. So I've taken it. So I've sort of made a lot of, just to be very clear, I've made a lot of personal decisions based on things I've read, but also the decisions are ultimately made from a performer's point of view and how they're useful to me as an actor. I also pronounce things differently depending on characters, and I sort of switch it out. So it's it's a little complicated, but
well, right, but
just so everybody knows, listening to this is like, well, he didn't. Well, that's not how it's supposed to be said, and it's a pretty hot topic. And some people, when you ask, they're like, you don't even bother, just pronounce it with like your English, like don't even bother. So they're just
right.
And a lot of people get very passionate about it. So, I just want to make sure everybody's represented in this conversation.
I know. I absolutely appreciate this, because I always feel like our audience is full of like historians and academics and teachers. And I'm definitely going to send the link of this show to my, my ancient Greek teacher, who also knows Latin and Italian. And I'm sure she's going to come back and be like, yes, I really appreciate that Joe said all of that stuff at the beginning, but here's where he pronounced this word wrong, or blah, blah, blah. Exactly. Oh, I would interpret it. It's totally fine. It's totally fine. Because I think I've seen you perform it at Java Studios at the library, which is your own personal
right at the study.
Yeah, at the study. That's right. And then I've seen it performed at, I think, the Actors Temple I did. Right.
A part of book 1 at the Actors Temple.
Yeah.
Presentation. Yeah.
Exactly. So I feel like, and now you're doing it outside in parks and stuff. And I feel like this is actually bringing it back to its original form, because as like one thing I think that all the scholars agree on, this was actually an oral poem that was performed in public, right? It wasn't necessarily written first. It was one of those things that was meant to be recited and heard, and the meter and the poetry, like that's the thing that was most engaging. And it wasn't just a bunch of like all of these old books that we have where it's all these, and ancient Greek is written in a like right. It's its own, like it takes a while to even understand the orthography, as well as all of the accents and how to break everything up into lines and things like that. So
and I would even say what I'm doing is even not the same, because it was improvised. That an individual poet could improvise these stories and use the formulaic language. So even what I'm doing is, there might have been times in antiquity where people memorized, where rhapsodes or, the Homeridae, the children of Homer, may have had set texts that they recited maybe during festival. It's all pretty complicated and
but it also...
so what I'm doing is like not even I don't know, it's just like ultimately it's my own design of using a text that has appeared, that was probably composed by many people over many years. There's lots about historical linguistics and formulaic language, and how similar formulas exist in other Indo-European languages. It's just like
right. And so wait, so when you're saying formulaic language, you mean something like wine dark sea or something, right? Like this, like yes. There are certain ways that somebody is described or thing is described, and that you can turn to it as you're improvising.
Right.
Kind of like hip hop or rap or something. Like here's a way that you, like here's a rhyme that you already have in your bank of things to pull from.
Right. There are units that can fit into different parts of the line, into the dactylic hexameter. And some of them are partial lines. There are also, full lines that are formulaic. There are also longer paragraphs that are highly formulaic and repeatable. And so, it's a really fascinating topic, I think. But all of that was used, we think, by the reciter, the one singing, to be able to compose contemporaneously. No, that's not
Or, uh,
extemporaneously.
extemporary-
Contemporaneously. That is not what I mean. That's not what I mean at all.
like reciting at the same time as his audience is living. Yes, right, like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, contemporaneously with the audience listening.
Yes. Well,
So
as opposed to like the asynchronous like world that we live in, where
right,
we
where right
record
now what's
something
happening,
and
right, we're if you're watching this, we're just I don't know, we're just
no, people could be watching this 5,000 years from now and be like, "Oh my God, can you believe it? They were talking about Homer back then."
right, right. But they're just watching ghosts. They're just watching digital ghosts.
Exactly.
Talk about
Exactly.
things. So
Yeah. And so I haven't been to any of your more recent performances.
uh,
I haven't been in New York lately. So can you describe what it's like to actually be out in nature in Central Park and
yeah,
have an audience
yeah. Well, the
and
first. Go ahead. What did you say?
no, and catch me up on that kind of experience because I would love to.
Yeah, it's super fun. I don't know.
Wait, do you do an introduction? Do you sort of like do stuff in English and then say this is what this is going to be about, or do you just sort of
So I what do I do? I show up, I set up, all of my props. I have a large box of props, and I set all that up, and people show up, and I talk to people as they appear, and no, and then at a certain point, I sort of go into the performance, I guess, and that includes some text to get to catch everybody up about what's going on.
right.
Who Telemachus is, who Odysseus is, the suitors and Penelope, and just the general outline. So I'm doing book 2, the second book. So that's the assembly that Telemachus calls to call out all of these suitors who are trying to marry Penelope, eating all their property, and et cetera, and
Right.
acting like jerks or something.
Right. And he's like, but my mom is trying to be patient, wait for my dad to come home. And like he
I,
might be killed, but we're thinking not. And
but we don't know, and so I give people text to catch them up and let them know what's happening and how it starts. Just the general outlines of book 2, and then I start performing in Greek all by myself. It's like an hour of reciting Greek on my
yeah.
own, which is a lot. And outside is really interesting. There's so many distractions. There are helicopters. There, sometimes the sun gets in people's eyes. It's just
Right. And are you having like strict
sometimes there are dogs, taking dumps behind me, which is amazing. I think appropriate and a good description of what I'm doing. I'm just a guy, taking a dump
wow.
in front of everyone. Don't take it too seriously. It's just me. Just I don't know. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
get this all out.
How did you get a critic to be so clear? Right. It's like a little too literal. Yeah.
And people walk by. Sometimes people stop and watch. Sometimes people have stayed the whole time. Sometimes people sort of walk by, and I will sometimes speak to them, like drop it, and speak in English to people walking by and say like, "Oh, hi, how are you doing?" And that sort of freaks people out.
Right.
I try to be ready and for whatever happens, to let it just happen. And at one point I was doing, I think it was I don't remember whose speech it was, but it was near the beginning, and I just I think I inhaled some dirt from the ground or something, because I just couldn't, and I was like trying to sort of cough or clear my throat as I was going through this speech, and at one point I just stopped. I was like, I think I breathed in some dirt and I'm having a really hard time. Can you just give me a second? I walked over to my bike and got the bottle of water and drank some water, and sort of cleared my throat, put the water bottle back in my bike, and walked back around, and just went right back into the whatever speech it was. It might have been the Eurymachus speech, I think. the Eurymachus speech to Halitherses. This might have been where I was, but I can't remember.
Right. Well, and if there's like a lot of like glottal things, or like you're using your throat,
Oh, so much. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, in a different way than you would when you're just speaking English, that I can imagine everything is like super sensitive and everything is, yeah.
So, but yeah, but I try to keep it. I think that's in some ways. I hope that ability to just respond to whatever is going on is part of my homage to the improvisatory nature of the older rhapsodes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since I can't compose an ancient Greek, on the spot at the moment yet.
Well, I like, frankly, that's not a talent that is often called for, so like the very fact that you are using your talents to just share it, and so because I will also say, and both of us are Portuguese, we have Portuguese backgrounds, that it's very rare for, I think, most Americans to be in a space where they are listening to a foreign language. And there are a lot of people who talk about like they don't want to go to foreign language films because they don't like subtitles, right? Or they're, at a Portuguese restaurant or a Greek restaurant or whatever, and they don't even know how to listen to a foreign language, or maybe they're listening for a name or some kind of landmark or something that's going to ground them in the conversation. So I feel like this is, and I think that you, or at least where I've been, you've done that as part of your introduction, where you're like, this is a name to listen for, this is a character, and this is what he's like, and this is whatever. So this is why I'm why I'm using this emotion to evoke his name or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Because part of it was when I started thinking about this project 5 years ago now. I didn't want to use subtitles or supertitles because part of what I was drawn to about the Odyssey was the language. Because the Odyssey is a book that that many people, that perhaps a majority of people have at least heard about and have some sort of like, oh, Odysseus and the Cyclops is, those are probably the two characters that people know the most when you mention the Odyssey, and then maybe it's
sirens
and Scylla, maybe Scylla and Charybdis, maybe
between a rock and a hard place, like
right, maybe Circe,
right.
maybe no Circe and Penelope,
Yeah,
but sort of beyond that, it starts to get fewer and fewer people.
Right, because it's not part of our, like it was in the 1800s, it's not part of our standard education anymore, where we even read it in English, let alone use it as a language exercise.
Right, but still people have generally a recognition that it is a thing that exists and was in Greek, and sometimes people are like, wait, is it Greek or Latin, but there's so anyway, but if people do encounter it, most people encounter it in English, in a translation, maybe in high school, in a setting that they really didn't like it and didn't enjoy it. I know when I studied it in my freshman year of high school, we didn't read the whole thing. We read excerpts and my teacher talked about it, but I didn't. I remember reading, probably the Fitzgerald translation, I would guess, or maybe Lattimore, and I remember reading it and thinking, I have no idea what any of this means.
Yep.
You don't get it.
So I was actually just reading this.
Yeah.
Is like the most recent and fabulous translation. And so Emily Wilson, in the translator's note, actually describes how in like 8th grade, her school actually put on a performed version of it that was maybe an hour, and she got to play Athena and in pigtails, and so like I remember what that was like, and how how much fun it was and how intrigued she was by the story. But I was really struck by that, because I'm like, wait, what kind of school does that? Like, I wish I had gone to that school. That sounds like so much fun.
I know, as opposed to these are the themes and this is what happens, and now you're going to take a test where you have to tell me what the themes are and what happens. Right. And so a lot of people have complicated feelings about the Odyssey. And even people who know the Odyssey, you know, people are like, well, Odysseus is a jerk, and like, why is he a hero? Why is he a role model? And is he a role model? Like, I think that's a big question.
Yeah.
And so part of my interest in doing it in the language in Greek is to say, like, this might stand at the, you know, what we might think of as the fount, the source of the Western tradition, but, and that may be true because lots of European literature has used the Odyssey and other, you know, Greek texts and stories to, you know, they've used them in their work,
Right.
but it's also a thing that is separate from us as well. And there are parts of the book that are both the poem that are both very relatable, you know, lots of relatable content.
Right.
But then you get to a point where you're like, this is not like us at all. This is not like how I live in America. You know, I don't cut up these animals and cook the thigh bones, and you know what I mean? Like, it's just, and split it up and, you know, pierce
Right.
it with.
Like we're not that we're not that hands-on, and I think we're aware of that as a society. Like, kids don't know that apples grow on trees. You know, they think it grows at the grocery store or whatever. You know,
Right.
yeah.
So, but,
And I was going to call out, as you said, like other European traditions have adapted this story. And so my favorite is the Lusiads, or Uj Lusíadas by Camões, right? Who was writing about the Portuguese explorers of like the 1300s, 1400s, and the so and had sort of created the whole idea of the Odyssey, you know, as, and had moved it to his modern, you know, contemporaneous time. And so let's also get back to like just the overall synopsis of the Odyssey, because it's sort of like, in a sentence, it's like this guy goes off to war, and this is actually about him just trying to get back. And instead of getting back home, he just encounters all of these horrible adventures. So whenever we use the word Odyssey, you know, it's sort of like, yeah, you know, I tried to go from, you know, Wall Street in Manhattan to like the, you know, to Washington Heights, and the subway broke down and the bus broke down. I had to walk and whatever. So it's sort of like, you know, but I feel like we also use that word as sort of like all sorts of other, as if it has all sorts of other meanings, just to describe any kind of journey.
Sure. So this, yeah, so it's, I guess, primarily a homecoming journey. And he was gone for 10 years fighting the Trojan War, and then it took him 10 more years to get back home, which is, you know, delightful for everyone.
Right. Well, and also like how often has that probably happened? I feel like there's stories of the Civil War where, you know, it takes people die on the way back, right? It's like they survive the war, but, you know, just coming back is really horrible because, you know, you can't rely on transportation.
Right. And Odysseus, you know, famously is, you know, bereft of all his companions. You know, they all the ships that he has heading home, you know, they all get picked off at different points. Then he has his one ship, and then, you know, Scylla eats some of them, and then they're at, you know, it's like, you know, then they all just like finally die, and it's just him, you know, alone, and he's on Calypso's island for 7 years, because only 3 of those years are even spent, you know, traveling. The 7 of them are just sitting on an island with a goddess who is in love with him and wants, you know, to marry him. It's, you know.
Well, right. And so I remember like in the Aeneid, right, in high school, and this was the thing that I like, the part of Latin that I remember the most was when, so, and you know, the Aeneid is essentially a similar story, and Aeneas is, you know, actually just trying to get to, you know, he wants to be the founder of Rome, right? He wants to build up this thing, and he has a sense of duty, but he gets distracted by Dido, right? So it's Dido and Aeneas, and there's an opera about that where it's like, really, do I really need to do this thing that I feel called to do, or can I just like sit here and enjoy romance and be here on a beautiful island with somebody who really loves me? You know, it's like that, like, and that's like the one of the quintessential stories of, you know, or themes. that runs throughout literature. I think it's like, do you get up and go to work, or do you stay at home and just be in love?
Mhm. That would be nice.
Right?
Gotta work though.
I know what I would choose.
Right. And and then Odysseus, of course, ends up being miserable on this island with this beautiful goddess, and that scene between the two of them, which I think in Emily Wilson's introduction, which I think is really great and worth the price of the book, she mentions how other translators have treated Calypso, and that they make her, I can't remember, or no, she maybe doesn't say this in the introduction. I was maybe watching an interview with her.
Yeah.
She was saying maybe they make her seem a little ridiculous. They make Calypso seem a little bit pathetic or ridiculous, but she's like, she's not those things.
So can I actually share a quote?
Please.
Yeah. So, and this is Emily Wilson talking about how she deals with the concept of women who are being punished for their sexual endeavors, right?
Mhm.
And she says most translators introduce derogatory language, sluts or whores, suggesting that these women are being punished for a genuinely objectionable pattern of behavior, as if their sexual history actually justified their deaths. The original Greek does not label these slaves with any derogatory language. And then, a lot of contemporary translators render Helen as dog face, or like shameless Helen or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, as a translator, she wanted to really figure out how to take the slut shaming and all of that out of our modern understanding of, or a modern bias, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of try to render the original Greek as clear as possible, right? Like there's another thing about how Penelope's hands are really thick. And, it's like, if you render it like that, it makes them sound clumsy or whatever. And she renders them as muscular, which is what you're doing if you're knitting all of the time, right? If you're embroidering, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. And the thing about Penelope that I love is like, she's like, yes, I will pick a suitor as soon as I finish this. And what is she knitting? A blanket or
she's weaving a death shroud for her father-in-law.
Exactly. So she's like, as soon as I'm done with this, then I will pick a suitor. And then so she weaves during the day, and then at night she just like pulls it apart.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. She does.
Which I think is like so clever and fabulous. So like that alone makes me love Penelope,
Yeah, I mean she's great. I love whenever she appears. Yeah, I mean it's complicated and it's complex, and I think this maybe will go into another conversation too, but I think that it's easy to take broader interpretations that have been valid for a long time as the way it is. And what I am excited about is looking at the text very closely, because I look at it very granularly, because I'm memorizing every single dang word.
Right. Every single syllable, every single
so
dynamic.
I can't really take any of it for granted. And what it does is it allows me to look at it very freshly and to not put it into whatever interpretations I've already heard, but to actually look at the text and what's happening and what really exists there to see what's going on and whether I find it to be problematic or whether, you know what I mean? And it's just sort of a reappraisal of the whole thing, which I think is happening, more broadly with classics in general and white supremacy, all these, it's definitely, and people taking the Odyssey off the syllabus and, all of that stuff, which I think is super interesting.
Right. And so sometimes they're taking it off because they just want to make room for, writers of color, and sometimes it's like, we only have so many hours in the curriculum for a year or for a class. So like, let's try to figure out what we do need to bring in and what we don't. And how do we curate, what we're giving to the next generation of people?
Yeah. And I think it's all really important and I think they're all really important questions to ask,
Yeah.
and to work to find solutions and try different things and see, you know what I mean? Because a part of it is like, well, do we all have to read the same things? Or
Right.
can we all choose what it is that we want to read, and the things that excite us and the things that mean something to us
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason? Because the other thing is like, I don't think, you know, I would never, I don't look at the Odyssey as like just like this beautiful example of how society should be, and you know how everything should be encoded and how it should all go,
Right.
which maybe, I don't know that anybody ever did, but I mean, well, in oh, I can't remember, maybe the 18th century, someone wrote a book, Fenelon maybe wrote a book called Telemachus, which was, I believe, my understanding. I haven't read it yet. I do want to read it,
Okay.
but
But it's not
the book is sort of using Telemachus as a, I think, as a, so anybody who's watching this, any scholars who are watching this, please, you know, comment down below and tell me that I'm full of it, that this is wrong, because I read it in another book. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
yeah.
You know, but using him as a model for young men growing up, and manners and what they're supposed to do, and certainly it can be used that way with his visiting Nestor and Menelaus and all of that stuff.
Right. And also he's a kid who's essentially being raised by a single mom, right? And he doesn't even really
Yeah,
meet
yeah.
his father until he's like 20,
Right.
right?
And so a big part of, you know, the first four books of the Odyssey are about Telemachus growing up and trying to not be a child and to become a man. And Athena comes down and says very specifically, you know, you know, she's saying it's not seemly for you to hold on to childish things, to the things that belong to childhood, because you're no longer a child, you're no longer that age.
Right.
And you know, and then later Eurycleus says something like, well, so again, a formulaic end line,
Mm-hmm.
no longer seemly for you. And then she says to wander on the sea, you know, and suffer ills. So
Yeah.
he has two people who have more authority than he does in some ways, telling him giving him two opposite pieces of advice. And of course he listens to Athena, and then he tells Eurycleia to not worry, because, you know, it'll be fine. The gods want, you know, him to take this trip, and so she shouldn't worry about it. But her response to it, and her distress at the idea of Telemachus getting on a boat and going on a trip, when her other child, Odysseus, you know, she raised both of them.
Right.
You know, it's like, well, her other child, her older child, is dead, you know, and suffered and is gone, and so now you're going to leave. So it's this beautiful, you know, Eurycleia is all of a sudden so alive, because her investment in what's going on, and her natural desire to hold on to her babies, you know, is so great. So you know, but that's the kind of stuff that I find to be so interesting, and it's not about, I don't know, it just is like a representation of these human things and these characters and how they might respond. Anyway, I'm rambling.
No. I absolutely agree, because I feel like that is actually one of those emotions that society kind of tells you that you just need to get over, right? Because especially I feel like when we hear about wars, and you know how like going into the military is such an important thing, and it will give, you know, all of these young kids such amazing structure, and it will, you know, teach them to grow up and blah blah blah. But like for all of the mothers and grandmothers and aunties at home, you
Mm-hmm.
know, who are completely aware of what war does to a family,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like it's literally the same emotion, because apparently humanity has not gotten over this idea of like, yes, let's just send our kids into this thing that we call war, or you know, like into dangerous situations. You know, it's like, you know, because there's the other idea of just like nobody should ever leave the house because everything's too dangerous. So I definitely don't want, you know, the 5-year-old to leave the house on his own, but I still don't want the 15-year-old to leave the house on his own.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because like really, why do you need to grow up? Why do you need to leave home? Everything is safe. I just made an apple pie for you. Come on, right?
Right, but then also, you don't want someone to be a failure to launch. You want, because we do
Right.
grow up and we do become adults and we do enter the complicated and messy world as it exists, right? It's
And
not,
you have to operate on your own. Yeah.
and you have to decide and you have to navigate, to use a,
Literally. Yes.
to use a, to use a
Take that
shit.
metaphor in. Yeah.
But you have to navigate complex situations that don't have clear answers, that aren't cut and dried, that aren't morally unambiguous or ethically unambiguous. And you have to figure that out, and how to deal with it, and how to deal with your mistakes, and how to deal with, and I do think that there's a way of looking at the Odyssey where you can do that. And so you can look at Odysseus and not, I think he does mess up. I think he does things that are not honorable. And even Telemachus, I think Emily Wilson mentions this in her introduction. I could be wrong. When he's asked to execute the women who have been sleeping with the suitors, and it's like rather brutal. And I think about that. And it's like, oh, like, yikes.
Right.
I don't know in what world is that actually okay? Is that justified? And he's told to do it. I think Odysseus tells him to do it. But I believe, if I remember, he chooses how he does it,
Mhm.
which is incredibly brutal. So, but I'm excited. But what excites me about the poem is to find those things that feel uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and instead of saying like, well, but this is like a really this is an old famous, well, it's in the canon, it's fine, like we honor it, we venerate it, we
Right. Right. Like it's like the Bible or whatever. Like you're not
right,
actually allowed to question it. Like that
right.
was just the way it was back then. So if it feels uncomfortable, then don't question it, because yeah, that was this other culture. And then you're like, but wait a minute, like killing,
But also,
yeah,
right, also, like, how does it affect us, and how do we behave in similar ways, and is that right? And I think that coming to a piece of text or a piece of literature, um, coming to it not I don't know, trying to leave aside preconceived notions about what the ethics or morality, or what or how you should respond to it,
yeah,
um, is good. I think, I don't know, and to see how it makes you feel, and to grapple with the questions that are brought up,
yeah,
and to neither accept anything blindly or reject anything blindly.
right.
Let it be difficult, and see what that does to you and how that affects you, I think.
Exactly. Well, and like, to bring it back to the Transcendentalists, I feel like there are a lot of people who discover Henry David Thoreau, right? Or like, as you mentioned, like they're first introduced in high school and they absolutely hate it because they're forced to read anything, right? So they're not going to read it. And then they come back to it and maybe they discover it, and like all of his writings, and they're like, oh my God, everything this man has written is like the best thing ever. And like nothing he does is wrong, and then but the more you sit with it, the more you're like, huh, he seems very rude when he's having to like talk to people at parties. Like, would he actually be a person that I would want to talk to? Would he want to talk to me? And you can get into that world and sort of say like, and again, it's something that only when you live with something, this abstract thing, these abstract writings that come from 200 years ago or 2000 years ago, that
Mhm.
you realize that it's complex, and that there are elements that you resonate with even now. Like I always have the image of Back to the Future, right? Like the Marty McFly, like let's jump into the DeLorean and pretend that we can go back in time and get out and have these amazing conversations. But there's the idea of the past being this glorious, simple thing that is not complex, and that back then times were more simple, and they figured things out.
Mhm.
It's completely this weird concept that I think we might have. And part of that might have to do with like America, and like we only like the new stuff, and especially with social media and all of the society, like everything has to be new. you
Mhm.
know, but I'm always surprised at the more we go back in history, the more layers we can uncover. And I don't know if I was rambling either, but you know, that's one of
No,
my takes.
because if you think about the way if you think about the way life is right now and the way your life is right now,
Mhm.
most likely it's pretty complex and layered. You have relationships with people that are probably complicated, at least some people. And that's interpersonal. That's just individually. And then you think about, the larger fabric of the community you live in and how and politics and how complex all of it is. And
Mhm.
then you think, well, it's never been any less complex than it was. So when you think about history, recognize that people also lived in complicated systems and
Patterns and relationships,
had
yes,
complex
yes.
relationships and had conflicted feelings about people and had that was that I imagine that's been happening all the time. And it's easy to look at history and think that it's because history sort of simplifies the lines, right, the curvature,
Yeah.
and doing that can be very useful, but doing that also can erase or overly simplify or
And
not take
be
into
reductive.
account certain things that maybe should be taken into account. Um, so yeah, I really try to encourage myself to approach, again, like I said earlier, approach a piece of literature or a text, and specifically this one, um,
Yeah.
as something that's just as complex as my life. And so my feelings about it can be just as complex.
Yep.
And the characters can be just as complex and inscrutable, and they can do good things and they can do bad things. And like I can have feelings about all of that, and I can
Right.
cheer them on at one second and I can roll my eyes at the next. And that's okay, that it's okay to not have to decide exactly what it all is.
Exactly.
And
Lovely.
maybe and eventually maybe I can, maybe eventually I'll have much nicer or much more well formed things to say about the whole thing, but I won't have that until I you know read it a lot more.
I was gonna say I remember like running into you. So I've also had a studio at Java Studios,
uh,
and we were neighbors for several years, right? And I remember running into you 5 years ago, and you're like, yeah. So I have this craving to start doing this thing about ancient Greek, and I'm really getting into it. And I remember you sort of talking about it in the early days. So is there
mhm.
any like so you must be at a different spot right now from where you were when you were just starting this project, right?
I mean,
Like,
probably. I don't know that I fully remember where I was back then. I started thinking about this project in the spring of 2016, and the way it started, I don't know if that's not the question you were asking. Is that a
oh
story that
no, well, tell me about it. Yeah, I remember this. Yeah,
you didn't ask that question, so I don't know if I'm just like giving information that you didn't ask for. Uh,
I'm totally into anarchy. So, like, answer whatever question you want.
Perfect. Um, but it started as like wanting to know some Greek text by heart, and so I was like, well, I'll learn the first three lines of the Odyssey, because I'm more interested in the Odyssey than the Iliad, which, now as I've encountered more of the Iliad, I also think it's pretty incredible.
Right.
And
So maybe future project,
I'm not as, what?
maybe a future project.
I mean, I would love to do more with the Iliad because that's also, that is a pretty incredible text for many, many reasons, and very different from the Odyssey in many ways and similar in many ways. And anyway, I love it all. But at that point, I was like, well, I'll learn the first bit of the Odyssey, and I learned the first few lines, and and it took me forever just to scan the lines and figure out how, what the accents were doing, and so to sort of get my voice to do the first few lines took a few days probably. but after I did that, I was so surprised by it. I was surprised by what it sounded like.
Mhm.
And I just had no idea. And I'd been looking at Greek for a long time. I'd been doing it on my own for, I think, 9 years at that point.
Oh, wow.
And I was still so surprised by what came out of my mouth when I just read the music, when I read the text.
Right.
I was like, oh, well, this is amazing. I did not expect to hear this. And so I thought to myself, I'll learn the first 10 lines, the proem. And, I should know that. And by the time I got to the end of the proem, my next thought, of course, in very classic me fashion, was, well, I should learn the whole thing and recite the whole thing as a performance at some point, obviously.
Obviously. I
To
love
just,
that, right?
let's jump from 10 lines to what is it, 12,109, I think is what it is.
Oh my God. And how many books, right? It's broken into 12
24 books, 24 books.
24. Oh my God. Yeah.
Each between like 390, 380 is maybe the short, 360. I can't remember what the shortest is. But the mid upper 300s, somewhere in the 300 range. And then the longest is 800 and some odd lines, maybe 9. I think it's book 4 is the longest.
Right.
So that's a fair amount of.
It's heavy duty stuff, let me tell you.
But I've also figured out that it probably would sit in 24 hours probably pretty well, the whole thing.
Wait, is that your goal? Are you going to do like a 24-hour?
That would be the goal. To do like a 24-hour, some sort of recitation performance in 24 hours of the whole thing.
No, dude, break in, like put in like 10-minute breaks for yourself, please.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. There'll be breaks. There'll be breaks at some point somewhere.
Yeah. Because does each book take roughly an hour or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
It's roughly 1 minute per 10 lines at the rate that I go. And I speak pretty quickly. I recite pretty quickly. Yeah. Yeah, it sort of averages out to about a minute for 10 lines. And I've done the math and that basically roughly comes out to 24 hours. So
I love that.
So,
I love that. Like, yeah. So that's like, so literally you're kind of like, oh, let me see if I can like walk these 2 steps. And suddenly you're talking about like Mount Everest. So,
right.
I love that.
And, and that's a little bit, that's maybe not how most people work, but then what's interesting is then I have this goal, and then it became about working out how to actually get to that and how to actually get to that goal and accomplish that. Yeah. And then what happened, I had the idea that to do individual books, and so that's why I started with book 1 and now book 2. I think I'll do book 9 next, which is the Cyclops. Give the people.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And
are you going to get a costume for that, or just use a prop? Or
I don't. I don't. Yeah, I have lots of ideas about how the Cyclops might appear and what Polyphemus might be.
And are you at this point? Are you also like working with a director or another artistic person to bounce ideas off of, or is this still like your own vision?
It's still my own thing for now. Mm-hmm. It's also because people ask me that, and sometimes when I say I'm not working with the director, I can tell that people think that that's a bad idea. And in some ways, and in many ways, it is absolutely a bad idea. Like I definitely acknowledge that.
No, wait, but also, yeah, go ahead.
It's definitely a bad idea for many reasons, but it's also, this project is also deeply personal, and it exists in my head in a way that is part of what it is. And the Odyssey is about one man. It really, Odysseus alone, ton doion, the one alone who is still not home, and he comes home alone, and he, it's so clearly about this, focalized through this one person. And whereas the Iliad, it's about Troy, it's not the Achilleid, you know. Is that a good joke? I hope some people laugh at that. I just thought of that.
That's an excellent pun about Achilles, right?
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
Iliad, not the Achilleid, or the
That
Achilleid.
has to be, yeah, that has to be some on your postcard or some kind of.
And I'm sure someone else has thought of that, but anyway, but I thought of that just in the moment. So, you know,
Yeah. So
I mean,
but I also do want to introduce the fact that you actually have been working in theater, right,
yeah.
as part of like your day job. So like when I bring up the director thing, it's not completely because I definitely do see as a performer or as somebody who really loves a language and a text that you only that you want to be in control of every single aspect. But your day job is essentially working in theater. And I think since you were a kid, right? You've been performing?
So, yeah, I've been performing for a long time. I started doing community theater when I was 6. I did my first, professional job, regional professional job when I was 11. And then I did my first sort of big professional, well, my first big professional job when I was 11 in the musical Big, which is why I rolled my eyes at myself. So,
Your first big production, yeah.
yeah, I not intended.
Yeah.
So I've been working, professionally as an actor, mostly musical theater, since I was 11 years old, and was definitely a passion of mine. I danced, I did ballet, have danced in a lot of musicals, and and then these sort of parallel interests have cropped up in Greek and other, hobbies, and then this sort of like separate performance practice started to develop. I don't know,
Yeah.
sort of randomly and unexpectedly, and it wasn't an intentional. It was definitely not intentional.
Right.
Um,
But I can definitely see, like, just as an artist, as an individual artist, like, there's a huge difference between working like as part of a large Broadway company, right? That
oh
where
yeah.
everything is super arranged. Like, you get the script from somebody, you take direction from somebody else, you have to work with other cast members. As
Mhm.
an artist, it must feel like so freeing, maybe, to actually be in control of what elements you're presenting, to bring in your own props. I've seen you do your own lighting. I've seen you do your own, like, you've created atmospheres, right? I saw you do like a one-man show where you were just in charge of everything. And I love that.
Well, that's how it's been. So I did that solo performance that I think you saw in the studio in Greenpoint.
Yeah.
And sure, that was all, I designed that and did the lighting and did the props, I guess.
Right.
And
Yeah, there were like trick things and you had like strings and you had like, it was so,
always there
all
are
these surprises.
always strings, little like devices. I love a device. Well, and that's part of it is that it's sort of a, we have worlds inside of our heads,
Mhm.
right? And so my response to this text is also the externalizing of the world that lives inside my head, and it's through the prism and lens of this, rather old and long text.
Yeah.
And that's part of why it's like, well, I don't feel at this point comfortable, or I don't feel uh, the impulse to have a director, because right now it's still very much coming from the internal space.
Yeah.
But I also acknowledge that if I want the project to get as big as I want it to, and I mean just scale wise,
Yeah.
I will never be able to do it on my own.
Right.
It's just impossible. I can't learn everything about electrics and lights and construction, and I just can't. I can't. You know what I mean? Like
All
I
those hats.
physically
Yeah,
can't do
absolutely.
it. I can't. I literally can't do it.
Yeah.
Right. So part of my learning to grow into the project is, well, how do I invite other people in, and how do I manage that? How do I manage my guarded the way I jealously guard the elements of it and the project itself, and how do I learn to trust people and bring them in. And I would love to work with more designers and a lighting designer and a set designer, and but how do I find those people, and how do I talk to them, and how do we get onto a page where it makes sense, and how does it not become a dictatorship, and how does it, because like that's not really desirable for me either. And so I haven't really broached many of those subjects yet.
But I feel like you don't, yeah, like whenever that time comes, you'll know it, and whatever that is. But right now I feel like you are directly paying homage to all of those children of Homer who were reciting, and they would just recite at parties, right? And it wasn't a big, Broadway musical. It was literally just somebody going up there and speaking, like all of these things, all of these words that were in their head and that they had been trained and were doing essentially probably out of love. And hopefully they were getting paid, or, getting extra food at the party or whatever,
Hopefully.
Right?
Yeah, wait, there was a thought that I had. Oh, because the other the other thing is the other director is the audience, because I speak directly to them.
Mhm.
And I'm the way like a stand-up comedian is obviously listening to the audience and trying to work out how a joke should be told, and how, it's a similar process where I'm very much trying to be tuned in to the people who are there and the people who are present with me, and trying to have a relationship with them, and letting the text morph and shift and adjust and have the shape that it should have with the people who are actually present. I think that's a big part of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's what I feel like a lot of modern directors and theater are sometimes fighting for when they're trying to get rid of the proscenium. They're going into a black box.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to find that a way that there can be a connection with the audience.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that it's like, yeah, what if you just do this from, like, as stripped down as possible, as sincere as possible, as in the moment as possible. um
Yeah.
you know
Yeah, because I hope um, people who make performances on whatever level and whatever genre and style, I think you do want to reach the audience. And the thing is, there's so many different ways of doing that. I've seen, huge Broadway musicals that I've been very moved by, and they weren't looking directly at me, and it wasn't
yeah.
an intimate experience, but the whole thing very, moved me in the performances. And, so there's so many different ways to do it. And this just, I don't know, for some reason happens to be the way that I've,
That you're doing it.
the path that I've started, walking down.
Yes, the Odyssey that you're on.
You know.
Yeah. Can you read some more Greek for us?
Okay, well, this sort of goes to what we were saying. I'll read.
Right.
Yeah, this is the beginning of book 9. So Odysseus is with the Phaeacians. He's with King Alcinous or Alcinous, and the Queen Arete. And he addresses Alcinous, and he says, toi men tore kalon akuemen estina oidu, toiud hoios hod este, te ois en alinkios auden, ugar regogeti pemitelos karies deroneinai, hot prosune meneke katade mon hapanta, dai dumones danado matakuas don taya oidu, hemenoi hexees, parade pletos itrapes dai si tu kai creon metu decreteros apuson oino os porre eis kai enkee de paes. So this is one of my favorite passages. This is one of my favorite passages, because he's saying, so this is right before Odysseus tells this, this court of people who he is, and right before he starts telling his story about his travels, right? Because all the travels are narrated by Odysseus from books 9 to 12 So all the famous part that we think it is just 4 books out of 24 that
Right.
he's really telling those stories. And he's saying, uh, he says, indeed, this is a beautiful thing to listen to a singer like this, or to listen to this kind of singer, such as this one is, the kind that this one is. So so he's at this party, and there's a bard, there's a poet singing Demodocus, right? And they've been listening to Demodocus, and Demodocus has been singing about the Trojan War, and Odysseus starts crying, and Alcinous looks at him and he's like, I wonder why this guy is weeping over these stories. I wonder who he is.
Yeah.
So he's saying there, it's a beautiful thing to listen to a singer like this one is, who is similar to the gods in his voice. So he has like a godlike voice. For I say that there's no end, there's no telos, there's no accomplishment that is more beautiful or graceful or fine than when euprosune, which is like merriment or wellness in your heart, basically. We'll say that for now. Then when that sort of wellness, heart wellness holds or seizes or takes hold of takes hold of the entire, the whole populace, the demos, the people, right? Takes hold of all the people, and they, as they are eating, listen, as they're eating and sitting throughout the halls, or sorry, anadoma, through the hall. Sorry, that's so hard. Greek is so hard because the words, the word order. Sorry, I should have come up with a translation before this. Anyway.
No, wait, you're translating on the fly? Like,
yeah, I am. Sorry.
I love it.
I should have thought about it better. And when they listen to the singer, eating, throughout the halls and sitting, right next to each other. They're all sitting in order. So there's this picture of the people, right? Of the group, of this social group, of the demos. And they're sitting there and they're eating and they're listening to a singer. This is the beautiful thing. There's nothing more beautiful than this, when they're joyful and listening to this singer. And beside them, there are tables that are filled with grain and meat, and the wine bearer or the wine pourer, the cup bearer, having drawn some alcohol, some methu, out of the crater, so he's pulling wine out of the crater, then carries that wine and then pours it into everybody's cups. So there's this beautiful image of people feeling, having that joyful feeling in their community, while there's this singer here singing and telling, with this godlike voice, singing to them as they eat and drink. And that's sort of an anchor point for me with the project, that it's like I want people to feel like they're sitting with people, with their community, that they're sitting together, and then I'm there speaking to them and talking to them and trying my damnedest to entertain them, and give them something that's I don't know, that's nice to hear. It's not just entertaining.
Right. It's like so the thing that resonates the most with me when I hear that is, of course, if I had been on a ship for years and years and I'd been separated from my family, from my community for like 20 years, yes, I would be crying too. But as a person who has been through the pandemic, right, and I'm sure, and all of your audiences are, that it's also exactly the same thing, because I feel like we have been away from that, just sitting around, being at a party, getting to hear somebody performing right in front of you. Right. And like, it's something that in the before times, in the normal times, totally wouldn't take it for granted. But now the whole idea of being within like a few like breaths of a person, right? 6 feet away, and 6 feet away from a crowd, and a crowd of friends, and a crowd of, or like also strangers. Like, I haven't been in a room with strangers it feels like a really, really long time. And I certainly haven't been in a beautiful situation like the one that you're describing of just like sitting and listening to a singer. Like I used to go to cabaret, I used to go to off Broadway, all of these great things in really tiny spaces,
Mhm.
and spaces that would feel super comfortable and super like you're in like, and also when you become part of an audience, like you're in, like you create a community that night or that for that the space of that event.
Mhm.
And I feel like crying now because I feel like that's been far too long for me. It's been what, 18 months or something. Like we're
So,
definitely in the pandemic, right?
yeah, yeah, and it's still complicated and uncertain, and
Yeah,
how we can do it and when, and
right. But you're doing it outside, which is sort of like
you know
that's the best case scenario at this point,
yeah, for now, and hopefully we'll start moving stuff back inside at some point.
Right.
But I always, with it, I always wanted to feel like we're all coming together in something, and that's part of why I perform for very few people generally, as
Mhm.
and
Right, I was part of an audience, I think, of two at one point. Yeah,
yeah,
it was
yeah,
wonderful. Wonderful.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of comfortable performing for that few people, and yeah, so as this thing grows, it's like I still want to keep that sense of that we're all still doing this together, and I can't take anyone for granted, and they can't take each other for granted, and
Yeah,
all of that. So yeah,
absolutely.
I don't know. How about that I just end everything with and I don't know.
I, I feel like that's actually the perfect philosophy for the times in which we live. Yeah, like this is what I want. This is what I'm trying to do. But honestly, I don't know. You
Well,
know.
like, and this is what comes to me now, and like these are my thoughts now,
Yeah.
and it might change, and the plan might change, and hopefully they'll change. Hopefully I'll have more thoughts and um, more developed thoughts, whatever that means.
Right. Like personally, I would love for you to be able to record it or capture it, or like to have some kind of documentation for people like me who happen to be in Boston, right? To be able to witness you. Um,
Uh-huh.
but also like as a personal record. And I feel like
Sure.
at least, and so I will also compliment you on the series of conversations that you had at your study,
Uh-huh.
um, right, where you would just invite like different people from different parts of your life into
Mhm.
conversation on Sunday afternoons.
Mhm.
That was this tiny in-person thing. It didn't feel like a performance, but it felt like an event,
Mm.
and I remember several times joining in when there were like just two or three other people and just having amazing conversations. And at least what I think subconsciously that was probably one of the inspirations that I had for doing this series that I have, where I'm just like, I need to record all of my friends because I want to like have some kind of tangible memory of them that I can go back to, and I know that I can revisit their voices and their intonations and what they were like in conversation, and just capture them, because I don't want people to come here to lecture, and I don't want people to perform. I want people to talk, and
Yeah.
you know
Yeah. Well, that event. Sorry, did I cut you off?
no, 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 I
Oh,
was I was
okay.
I was I was gonna go, and yeah, I don't know.
And I don't know. Sure. And yeah, sure. I don't know. Well, that event in particular, the reason why I wanted to do it was what you said, that I wanted five people, max, to be there, including me, five including me,
Yeah,
and that we would sit and lock the door and turn off our phones, and I'll set a timer for an hour, so it's not an infinite amount of time. It's definitely a well-defined period of time, and we'll sit. I will pour tea. We'll all drink some tea, and we'll just take a breath
yeah,
and like look at each other and talk about whatever comes up. Because so what I do find so often, and this isn't bad. I mean, we had like, I came here with a plan, and I watched some of your other videos to like understand what the format was and what was going on, and and we came here with some not super well defined, but definite goals, and of what I wanted to talk about and what this was going to be about. But with this in particular, that it's like, well, the content is not defined, and that actually by defining the event around it is just giving space for something that is can be whatever it needs to be for that group of 5 people on that day at that time, whatever it is, and to watch those conversations unfold was always so beautiful and fascinating. And to listen about what, when there was a lull in the conversation and how people get uncomfortable with that, and they're the people who, as soon as there was a lull, they would introduce
talk about the weather,
talk about, they're like, well, I need to say something, and I need to, and just to watch that behavior and be a part of that, and to see where that leads and see how people, it's just, I'm going to start doing it again soon now that things are, whatever they're doing, whatever they're doing, because it was an incredibly valuable, and it also is when I perform my my work, whatever that means, the solo performance or these Odyssey performances, when I'm done, it's always like, not always, but often it just feels so nice. Like it feels like heaven. It feels, for whatever reason. And I feel like those conversations, those tea conversations, had a similar thing where by the end of it, it was just like, this is so nice. This feels nice and right. And, we can all go back into our days and go back to our schedules and our to-do lists and, all the things that we need to plan and do and work out. And that's also incredibly necessary and useful, and, nothing wrong with those things. But it's good to have the other thing as well.
Well, and to tie it back to the Transcendentalists, because I feel like there's this.
Oh yeah, we're talking about the Transcendentalists. We have to talk about that.
Well, we don't have to, but I in the way that you always think about stuff that applies to Greek, I'm always thinking of Henry David Thoreau and Emerson or whatever, and I'm always like, hey, what about this? I feel like one of those things is that the Transcendentalists started meeting in 1836, and it was kind of a series of meetings where they would talk about philosophy. And it was so hard for them to actually define what a transcendentalist is, right? It's like you get 10 people in a room, you'll have 10 different definitions. And the writing that came after that to try to, capture it. And I think Margaret Fuller did the same thing with Congress. She literally did a series of conversations for women, where she would also just bring people in and just say, you may not have the perfect education, you may not have gone to Harvard, but there's stuff that I want to hear from you. And here's ideas that I want to put forth into the world. And so those pieces actually were in place before all of the writings that actually came out. Emerson's first big thing is Nature in 1837.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's sort of like the conversations came first, and this holding space in time for these ideas, that thing came first. And there's no way. And again, like Marty McFly, even if I could go back in time in a DeLorean, I would love to be a fly on the wall, and I would love to sneak into one of those meetings. But there's no way that I can physically do that at this moment in time. But it's about realizing that people did that back then too, and it was so important that it wasn't just a series of events, and where it wasn't just a series of people sitting down to tea. It was something that moved the moral or the philosophical, and people talk about it as the second American Revolution. Revolution in literature, the revolution in, we don't have to take all of the ideas coming from Europe as the only thing that we talk about. We can have an individual American school of thought. So
yeah, and I think it's important, time marches on, as they say, and we can look back and valorize certain things about the past, but we also know that certain things about the past weren't good. And I'm sure there were things about Emerson and Thoreau, that if you had a conversation with them and they said certain things, you'd be like, wow, I really don't agree with that. That's horrible. Right.
Yes, but like Ralph, how come you're not talking about, or Waldo, how come you're not talking about slavery like right now? How come you're not fighting against it from the beginning? Like he eventually did, but in the beginning it's kind of like, stop being so comfortable. Use your fame for good, right? So yeah, there's plenty of stuff to argue with them about.
Right. And so I wonder, I went to this theater in Denmark, run by or founded by this guy named Eugenio Barba. And someone asked him in a session, they asked him what, I'm going to paraphrase all of this.
Yeah.
This is what I remember. So this is the mythologized version of this interaction, which may not have happened like this, but this is what I got out of it and what it meant.
And I'm sure it's going to be better than the actual thing.
There you go. Who knows? I mean, no, I don't know about that. But somebody asked him, like, what tradition of theater do you exist in? And and he worked with Grotowski. That was his main.
Yeah.
That's where my understanding is where he like learned a lot about theater, right?
Okay.
And so he could have said like, oh well, Eastern European lab theater is my tradition, and that's what I existed. And on some level, he does exist there. Yeah. But he said, well, I think that as theater artists, we each make our own tradition, which is somewhat paradoxical, right? Because a tradition is to hand something down, and trado, right? That by definition, or at least etymology, it is to hand something over from one person to another. Yeah. So to make your own tradition, it's like, well, if nothing's coming to you and you're not, and if the next person after you is supposed to make their own tradition, then how is that a tradition, right?
Right. But then again, like nobody ever does anything exactly the same way. Even if they're trying to, like whatever they do by definition is going to be their own version of it because it's not the original person doing it.
Right. And so you can be inspired by the past, you can be inspired by other writers and what's come before you. And I certainly am. I mean, Eugenio Barba is definitely a touchstone for me and what I do in theater. But then also I understand that I'm not, so he has given me certain things and I've learned certain things from him, but I'm not just doing what he did. I'm taking some essence of it and the ways that it has inspired me. And then it's my responsibility, job, challenge to compose it in a way that fits inside of the country I live in, the city I live in, the body I live in. I have a very specific body. But
yeah.
No, that's what I mean. We all we all have very specific bodies, even inside of the categories that we exist in. We all still exist as individuals, right? And so then it's about finding, well, how does this need or impulse to express what's going on both live in these externals and the world around me, because all of that input lives inside of me, but then there's also something unique that lives inside of me too. And so how do those things meet, and how do I find the way to externalize that or embody that, or what is the form? And I don't know what it is, but that's what I think maybe he's asking about, what making your own tradition, that it's responding and then or taking in and responding, and that interaction is in itself a special thing, which is, I think, which is what I think that's how we can deal with like literature too, and respond to literature, that it's, there's lots of talk about like death of the author, but also, biographical information and whether that's important or not, and whether the intent matter and all that stuff. And it's like, well, but we can also look at it that way, that you're having a personal encounter with, words on a page or whatever it is. And you can take all of it in, you can take none of it in. It can all,
right.
It's actually just about what it starts to do to you and what arises in you, and how then you want to bring that back out into the world. Yeah. You can take it all in, and that's just what it is. But it's not about finding the exact answer or the right reading
Right.
of something, which is,
Right.
I think, what at least in high school many of us get taught is the right thing. You've got to find find a reading and then defend that reading.
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
Right. Like there's only the right answers for the test.
right, and that's never going to be a fully objective, definable, provable thing.
Yeah.
It can be defensible but not provable, right?
I like that. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so I don't know.
No, exactly right.
We'll end with that again. So, I don't know.
Yeah. No, but I'll like to also to get back to the idea of a tradition, like you don't feel validated in whatever it is that you're doing until it gets cohesive, and maybe like your own personal tradition doesn't feel like anything that you can hand over to somebody until you've solidified it, until you have come to some kind of understanding of like, yes, this is a thing I want to do, or here's how I'm interpreting it, or here's how I have brought all of these different elements together, and this is what I've produced with it.
Yeah.
You know?
And when you do hand it over, can you allow the people that you hand it over to take it and do the same thing that you've done
Yeah.
with what came before you?
Right. Right. Oh my God. So thank you so much. This has been such an amazing conversation. I feel like I need to also, respond to my own alarm that, we do need to end at
I
some
know. We do. This is,
yeah.
we could go
But
on for much longer, but
yeah, literally. And I'm happy to have you in my life. I'm happy to have had several of these similar conversations with you in the past. I'm glad that I have something recorded that I can now share with the world. Anybody who is anywhere within, hearing of you doing Greek, like
mhm.
I would highly recommend that you attend any of your performances, even on Broadway. I guess you're probably good there too. I've seen you once or twice. I would actually love to get you to like the shores of Walden Pond and get you to perform there.
Please.
So
I'd love to. Let's find a book. Maybe we do Calypso there, the beautiful island.
yeah,
Maybe there's something about, yeah, Walden Pond and Calypso. There's always got to be, some sort of essence about the location and the book and what happens in the story. And
exactly. And you could do it on a raft or a canoe or something. You could be out on the water.
okay,
Maybe.
we're doing book 5, Calypso on Walden Pond. How about that? Because that's when he makes the raft and he gets that shipwreck. I mean, okay, we're definitely doing it.
All right, excellent.
Can you swim in Walden Pond?
Yes, I swam there last Thursday.
Oh my gosh. Okay, great.
It's starting to get cold, but yeah, I can totally, yeah. If you want to do a swimming performance, I would recommend like the summertime, but
Well, it's going to take me some time to memorize book 5, so
okay.
And think about what props, make props and do all of that. Okay, I'm actually really excited about this. That's a great idea.
Yay. Yes. Well, I'm so happy I've inspired you.
Calypso on Walden Pond. I love it.
Exactly. Well, awesome. Well, and I want to thank everybody who has been listening. This has been Concord Days, and it's part of Transcendental Concord. And if you go to transcendentalconcord.com or .org, you can find this YouTube conversation series, the Walden the Book podcast that I do, where I'm reading Walden and doing commentary on it. We also have a Facebook group on called Transcendentalist 2021. And then we do a Thursday night book group. And you're welcome to join us for any future things. And thank you very much for listening. And thank you, Joe. This has been wonderful.
Of course, thank you. And thank you to everybody listening. And if I got anything wrong or said anything, dumb that you disagree with, let me know. I'm interested.
Yeah, exactly. We're all about learning. Love it.
All right. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you. Thank you.